All right, so I wanted to go over some of the questions I saw as I was going through Knowledge Check 3, I guess. We had a lot of confusion about how to read graphs, especially going back and forth between the different graphs that we have. So we actually started out my 16-week classes with my 119X, my hybrid, with this question this week. Which one of these doesn't belong? And I like these types of questions because if you think about it for a moment, all of these have a correct answer for why they might not belong. We could look at A and note that this is the only group that is bimodal, that has that gap in the middle as opposed to like towards the end of a tail. We could talk about group B and how this is the only class with a 0, right? Every other class, people at least got some points. Um, my classes noticed that Class C is just really, really good. Most of the students it was a very condensed distribution. Most of the students did really well on the test. This was most students getting above a 50. Just one straggler getting a 30 to 40, but again, that's much better than the minimums in the other groups. And then D had this sort of uniform looking distribution where everything was equally likely, even the very low scores. So, and some students here noted that highest frequency, which is also due to the fact that this is a uniform distribution. I'm sure if we went a little bit further, we could find some other ways things don't belong in terms of how many are in each of these groups. But that was what was noticed in my classes. I then had them try to figure out which class was which in terms of hybrid 119X first 8-week, knowing that the 8-week accelerated classes are more challenging because you're covering everything on your own and in half the time. The hybrid we meet once a week, and my 119X we meet 3 times a week, but they don't need to have any prerequisites to get in. So these are students who may not have seen math in the last 20 years taking that class. So, we can make these guesses based on that little bit of knowledge, but we don't really know a whole lot. So the next thing I showed my classes was this dot plot. Same exact data, but instead of in a histogram, it's in a dot plot. Nice thing about a dot plot is I can put all of these together on the same axes at the same time. And this is where you have to recognize going back and forth between different graphs is as simple as understanding that the graphs are representing the data. And some graphs are easier to see the data in than others. The one I asked you for in the knowledge check specifically used the 2 worst graphs to really visualize or go back to the original data. Dot plots are nice because every dot represents a data point, so I can see exactly where the data was, even if I do kind of have to estimate sometimes whether a value is an 84 or an 85. So that being said, we can still pick out little pieces to get back from here to the original question about which of these maps to which. And so my students, of course, in my other classes did a pretty good job of recognizing what was happening here. Looking at this graph, they said, here's that really low score of a 0. Turns out that is actually a 0. So somebody in my hybrid class didn't take exam 1. I think this was last spring. Okay, so we know that this is the hybrid. I don't know why I switched to capital letters. And I wrote it wrong. Hybrid. All right, and we can keep going. Ooh, which other one should we be able to see? Well, let's look at the next one. Ooh, this next group did pretty good. All of the values are pretty condensed and they're mostly above 50. I bet that's graph C. This is the first 8-week. This should bode well for you guys. I think partially this is because students who are signing up in the first 8-week, they recognize that there are other classes they could go to. So if they decide that they want to leave and try to get into a different section of 119, usually that add drop period happens early enough for the 119 for the 8-week that they can go find another section. So I think that's why I end up with such a strong first 8-week. That self-selection more than anything else. And then the next one, the other 2 are really pretty similar, right? If you look at them, you can see they both have similar ranges. The 119X is a little bit tighter, but we might notice there's sort of this gap in the middle of the 119X, whereas the second 8-week does appear to be fairly consistent throughout, whereas this has like these 2 separate little lumps. So that gives us our final 2 pieces here. This is my 119X, and this is the second 8-week. So again, we didn't need to be able to read everything about all of these graphs. We just needed to look for certain things and then break down what we did and didn't know. Another thing we could do, which is similar again to what you have to do in your knowledge check, is to move from these types of graphs to a box plot. So if we want to go to a box plot, that's all about recognizing that this data, of course, the box plot data represents our 5-number summary. So we do need to know how many things there are, and I counted this up. So we had 26 students in the 119X who took the tests last semester, or this is spring, which means that there are 13 in each half. So I counted this up earlier, I promise. 13 there and 13 there. And so we could kind of call that like these each have 13. So 13 plus 1 divided by 2. I'd be looking for the 7th. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I've got all of like, this is the minimum. This is Q1. This is Q3. The median has got to be directly between those two values because since it is 26, there'd be an even number. So directly between those two, and I could connect these up. There's the box, and there's that. I could even visually decide, are there outliers? Should I have made a modified box plot? But if we look at the length of the box for this group, especially because that bimodal distribution, if I put this 1.5 times to either side, there's no way I'm going to have to cut off data. So no outliers. This box plot would represent the data well. So really thinking about what all the pieces of a box plot are. But again, it's all about recognizing that there's different things that we can tell, right? For this particular graph, we know that the minimum is associated with the end of the whisker. And Q1 is going to be, right? We can figure out what each of these pieces are. And sometimes it doesn't even represent a piece of data on the graph. When we're dealing with the box plot, technically we can end up like this, where we're actually getting a median floating in the middle where there wasn't any data. But this also brings up a really important point about our box plots. They don't have the same interpretability as, say, our histogram, our dot plots, or our stem plots, because you cannot tell if something was unimodal or bimodal to start with, right? There's nothing about this box plot that's letting you know how strange this original histogram looked for group A, right? All we got here is this little box plot, which we again could just draw on top of this one. Here, oh, I did not use my right pen. We got a box, then we went to 41, and then that was somewhere in between, and we were at 84, and then to the end. Like, that's not the most useful thing in the world. I do have nice Desmos activities that have you sort the different displays and put them all together. So you could practice this if you wanted to. But again, I think it's mostly about recognizing there's data underlying it. What do I know about the data from this graph? How was that related to the data given to me from the other graph? Another question has just generally been, there's a lot of tricky kind of percentages questions with these box plots. So just keep in mind, each of these pieces represents 25%. And of course, I didn't ask any questions that were that easy. I did give you questions with the 90th percentile. But just know that information with a drawing will usually help you out for those two questions that start talking about percents. Draw out a box plot and pay really close attention for direction on those keywords. But email me questions. I'm here if you need them. Hopefully that makes you feel better. I don't know.